Hello, everybody. Welcome into this edition of the Classic City Lager. Actually, I should say the Dog Nation Happy Hour, poured by Classic City Lager. My name is Brandon Adams. I've got John Stinchcomb with me. We're getting ready for Georgia and Tennessee coming up on Saturday, and a fun preview of that, a great renewal of one of Georgia's most really intense rivalries, and that takes place again in Athens on Saturday. John, hope you're having a good week. Thanks for spending some time here with us on the Dog Nation Happy Hour, and I'm looking forward to talking dogs and balls with you here today.
I'm having a great week. It started off well when you enter the week after a great weekend, having Georgia perform so well against Auburn on Saturday.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. And so Georgia tries to take that momentum into Athens again on Saturday for the Tennessee Vols as they come in. For Tennessee, this is a huge one. Having won 8 straight, mostly against less than stellar competition, this is that big step up moment, a chance for Tennessee to prove that they are for real. And obviously Georgia hoping to stand in the way of that and get that one more. I don't want to call this a tune-up game because it's more than that, but it is the final tune-up before Georgia goes to Tuscaloosa next week. So from that standpoint, you want to make sure you're firing on all cylinders. And, you know, Kirby Smart has tried to tell us this week that Tennessee is a step up in weight class because of what they do at the lines of scrimmage. John, I'm not quite so sure that Georgia fans are buying into that, but I think there is a degree to which that Smart should be taken at his word.
I think Tennessee is much improved. I think their offensive and defensive line play is arguably one of the biggest improvements that they've made. They've got some guys up front on both sides of the ball. They play physical. You saw a couple different formations from them this past Saturday with 7 offensive linemen on the field at one given time. So they're trying to pound the ball a little bit and create an identity of being a physical football team. I think Coach Pruitt is wanting to progress this Vols team and make them a little more relevant in the East. 8 straight, that's a long run for them to not be competitive. And I think they see this as an opportunity to come in riding on a 2-win win streak and compete against a Georgia football team that they feel might not be as established as they've been in years past.
I want to talk about the Georgia defense coming up in a moment, including a very interesting thing that a Tennessee assistant has said about that unit. Before that, though, for those of you who normally tune in on YouTube to check us out, we apologize for those YouTube issues here today. We're trying to work through that for our broadcast schedule, but thanks for taking the time to join us on Facebook right now. With that in mind, I want to read this to you, and I'll put this on the screen for you to see as well. T. Martin, Tennessee assistant, speaking on a radio station in Alabama, as quoted by AL.com, was giving Georgia a compliment. And in particular, John, given what I want to see from the Georgia defense, what I was hoping to see more of at the start of the year, I love the fact that a Tennessee assistant, Georgia's upcoming opponent, is describing the Georgia defense this way. Listen to this. He says about Georgia last week, they were clicking on all cylinders. This is T. Martin. Their quarterback is operating good. They run the ball well. They hold on to the ball, converting third downs. Now, he says defensively, they were aggressive. They pressured the quarterback. They disrupted a lot of things up front. He says we look forward to the challenge. John, I think last year you could have watched the Georgia defense a lot, and you could have said a lot of complimentary things. They don't give up very many rushing yards. They don't give up very many touchdowns. They don't give up very many yards of any stripe. But I don't know how many people a year ago, with all due respect, would have said, this Georgia defense is aggressive. This Georgia defense is disrupting a lot of things up front. They're pressuring the quarterback. On Saturday, that was definitely something that was present for Georgia against Auburn. You can say, well, you'd like to have seen them get home a little bit more on some of those pass pressures and actually produce some more sacks, and I'm fine with saying that. But actually disrupting Nix as much as they did on Saturday, I thought was a crucial component in that game and maybe a harbinger that there really is more pass rush on the way here for UGA. For me personally, who has kind of thought this has been missing from very good Georgia defenses in recent years, the fact that T. Martin says this is what I'm seeing from Georgia defensively ahead of this game against the Vols, I take that as really good news.
I would argue that Bo Nix is one of the most athletic running quarterbacks, a guy who can threaten a defense with his legs, as Georgia will see this year. And they were constantly harassing him. I think a lot has to do with the rebuild that's occurring on Auburn's offensive line. But let's give credit to Georgia's guys. The disruption that Adam Anderson provided, Azeez Ojulari was very prevalent in that backfield, moving the pocket. And it may not have always translated to sacks, but Bo Nix was harassed constantly for 60 minutes on Saturday, and that's a much improved disruption occurring behind the line of scrimmage, which we've made a lot of to-do about this offseason. They had Georgia, if you're looking for a way that defense can improve, how about disrupting the passer? And they did that on Saturday with a guy who is mobile and can still threaten a defense when he's outside of the pocket, but they constantly had that pressure in his face. Tennessee with Guarantino, it's not that same setup, but you're going to have that physical opportunity for this defensive line to say this wasn't a 1 week fluke of affecting the passer and getting to that spot, if you will, as a defensive line. I think they made a lot of strides and showed on Saturday they've got the capability. There's a couple guys that really stepped up and stood out.
Rick Larkin watching on Facebook says this isn't bulletin board material from T. Martin. He's just going to go ahead and state facts. And I guess that's probably true. And I think that's something that you mentioned, John, is probably true as well, that if you can disrupt quarterback play, if you can be more of a presence in the backfield, then for someone like Jared Garantano, who I think that is probably more comfortable in year two working with Jim Chaney as the offensive coordinator there, affecting his timing with more pass rush. Now, listen, you'd love to see it turn into sacks. And obviously last year, a big hit on quarterback is one of the things that really preserved an easy Georgia victory in the second half of that game against Knoxville. But the same way that you needed quarterback pressure to disrupt Bo Nix last Saturday against Garantano this upcoming Saturday, I think the same thing is probably true once again.
Yeah, you don't want any of these SEC quarterbacks to be comfortable. And this is another second-year quarterback that, at times has made plays, but what you want to do is get their eyes off of their wide receivers, any quarterback at any level. Anytime they're more worried about where the pressure's coming from and how do I evade and where do I need to move, that's less time they're spending figuring out how to progress from number one to number two in their receiver breakdown. So it's important. I think it really matters. I also think that Tennessee's going to start by trying to punch Georgia in the mouth and see if they can lean on this defensive front, which I think is a good matchup for Georgia. The interior guys for this Georgia defense has been a strength and continues to be. Jordan Davis is a beast. And then you throw in some of these other guys that are starting to come into their own. Trayvon Walker and Jalen's getting more reps. And then some established guys like Devontae Wyatt. So that's a strength of Georgia. Think of, this is one of those old school, if you will, heavyweight SEC battles between Georgia and Tennessee with, it's coming down to the big uglies in the middle that are going to try to, slugfest each other. And I think that's a good matchup for Georgia. I think that plays into the teeth of this defense, if you will.
Along those lines, James Crump in our Facebook comment section also mentioning in this line of scrimmage game that we expect to see, it could be accentuated by the fact that the weather right now is not expected to be very good. Now, it's still early enough that you could maybe hope for a forecast change. I'm certainly hopeful that the folks in Athens get a chance to enjoy as close to a true fall football Saturday as they can. But there's a number of SEC games this week that are expected to be impacted. The venue has been changed for LSU, Missouri. The time has now been changed for Alabama, Ole Miss. They've moved it back just a little bit. Heavy rain for the Georgia-Tennessee game at one point in time this week. That was thought to be a possibility, and who knows if it ends up being that way or not. But, John, how does the weather potentially play into this? We obviously saw Georgia not play particularly well, certainly in the rain last year against Kentucky and to a degree also against Texas A&M as well. What do you think the rain potentially does, if it does come? What does that do to a game that we already expect to be heavy when it comes to line of scrimmage play?
Well, I think it just speaks to that slugfest. That's the direction this game is heading. You're not going to go for the pretty finesse. Let's start darting the ball in the 5 to 10, 15-yard range pass game. That's just not the way this game is going to play out. Nor was it going to if the weather was perfect. But, things slow down and becomes a mutter, if you will, and you're going to have to create those seams and pick your spots and figure out when you are going to take those shots. But most importantly, it's protecting the football. When it's wet and there's conditions that are more conducive to turnovers, you have to protect the football. which, we haven't spoken a lot about it, but the offensive side of the ball, that was one of the most important improvements that you were hoping to see from week 1 to week 2 that actually did occur. I think Georgia struggled in the run game. There wasn't a lot of run lanes. The offensive front wasn't productive, and the progression from week 1 to week 2 was staggering. I think that was the most improved group of any. I also like the vision of Zamir White. I mean, a guy that is running hard. He was hitting some, tiny windows, which was a great sight for any Georgia fan to see that he's starting to recognize and feel comfortable in that offense, knowing what his reads are and being able to hit them.
I want to talk more about the Georgia offense in a moment, including something I thought pretty interesting that Kirby Smart had to say about Stetson Bennett on Wednesday. Before that, let me squeeze in a couple more topics on the heels of or I should say a couple more comments on the heels of the topic we were just addressing there about T. Martin's thoughts on the Georgia defense. William Perry wants to know what you think of Cade Mays in the lineup for Tennessee. Probably not a very good game, at least statistically speaking, for him in his first time out against Missouri last week. You saw Mays play a lot at Georgia. What kind of impact do you think Cade makes on the game on Saturday?
I think he's going to be fun for fans to occasionally watch. I mean, I think there's some motivation for him to take his shots when you get a chance. Will it affect the game? Not really. I don't see that as a storyline. If you're looking big picture, I don't think it's very important to the outcome of the game. He hasn't become this cornerstone for this Tennessee offensive line. And candidly, last week's performance is not something that you go, ooh, this is a scary proposition. Now, having seen him play for a number of years in the red and black, that given the opportunity, if he gets a chance to take a guy's head off, he's going to do it. I mean, he plays physical and has that kind of bully mentality where if he feels like he's got an opportunity to put a guy on the ground, he's going to take it. But is Cade Mays a factor in whether or not Tennessee or Georgia wins this game? No, I don't consider him, any of the top 10, 15 guys as influencing the impact of how this game turns out.
It's our Dog Nation Happy Hour. It's poured by the Classic City Lager. It's good to have John Stinchcomb a part of that, and good to have all of you with us too. And I'll remind you that if you want to taste the Classic City, a true Athens original, that's what Classic City Lager from Creature Comforts Brewing Company truly is. But you don't have to be in Athens to get it. It's available in 6 and 12-pack cans at whatever retailer you enjoy shopping at. You can find some Classic City Lager. I'm talking about an easy drinking beer, lager-style beer, but crisp flavor, lots of great taste. That's what Classic City Lager is known for. It'll remind you of being in Athens. It's a great pairing for football here this time of year. So please make sure you check out some Classic City Lager from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing Company. You can stop by and see them in their snow tire facility right there in downtown Athens. Or, as I said before, whichever retailer you like to go do your shopping at, you can pick up some 6 and 12-pack cans all year round. Some delicious, great tasting Classic City Lager. It's good cold beer. In fact, you can find out more about our friends at Classic City Lager by checking out the hashtag good cold beer. All right, let's talk about Stetson Bennett here for a moment, because the Kirby Smart said something on Wednesday about him that I really thought was kind of interesting. That when you look at Bennett, you kind of see a guy that not as tall as maybe the typical SEC quarterback would be. Recruiting credentials not quite as sterling as maybe the typical SEC quarterback would be. However, there's one aspect of Bennett's game that I believe is actually ahead of most SEC quarterbacks, and most SEC quarterbacks probably wish they had as much of this as Bennett seems to have. I want to read this from Kirby Smart. On the SEC Coaches Teleconference on Wednesday, he was kind of asked what it is that he likes about Bennett thus far, and Kirby says it's his composure. He's very composed. I would call him a vet in terms of practice reps and quantity of work. He just hasn't had as many SEC live reps. And the fact that he has not played all that much until this season, and yet when he does go out there and play, to use Smart's word again, he does so with composure. He stays very calm, it seems like. No moment seems to be too big for him. He described the Auburn game as fairly easy the other day because of all the good things that were happening around him, the defense, the running game, and everything else. But for most players, quarterbacks in their first start, against a team like Auburn, top 10 matchup, big national TV spotlight, I'm not quite so sure they would have necessarily thought of that as easy, and yet it seems like that's what Bennett kind of viewed that game as being. I do think he has got an uncommon level of confidence. I think, John, that has aided him through the game and a half worth of success that he's had thus far this season. You obviously play with a lot of quarterbacks during your career. What do you make of Bennett's demeanor thus far?
It reminds me of freshman David Green, where you think this situation is huge. You're in some big time games. The last time you were the starting quarterback, you were in blue and gray for South Gwinnett Comets, and yet the moment was never too big for him. He didn't get distracted by the lights and the what if scenarios. They're able to focus on what's important. If X, Y, and Z happens, then I need to do A, B, and C. And some guys don't get caught up in all the periphery. They just have a focus on, okay, given the parameters of the situation, here's what I have to do to execute. And that's where their focus is. They don't see everything else. And so that's when you get guys that you're like, the moment's not too big for them. Mm-hmm. And they are prepared for that situation, as compared to others who are like, deer in headlights. When you start throwing in more adversity, more distractions, it's hard to focus. It's hard to realize at the end of the day, I'm just throwing the slant route and reading that it's too high. Okay, well, I've done that a million times. But if you get distracted that, oh no, the last time we were in this situation, or this is the first time I'm underneath the lights, and you're focused on the wrong thing. So I think with guys like Stetson, their expectations are different. They go into the scenario and they can filter all the information down in a play, in a series, in a moment to, this is what I'm supposed to do. All right, well, if I'm in a pass play and these are my reads, well, all of a sudden there's a rush in my face, well, I'm going to scramble. And if I still have a receiver, it just becomes very simple to them. They can execute and manage the number of different variables that are thrown at them and whittle it down to something that's very simple. And it's a beautiful thing when you see it. And some guys, it comes very naturally. And I think Stetson falls into that category where it just becomes easy for him.
Well, that's one of the things I wanted to ask you. If you want to compare Stetson to your former teammate, good friend David Green, is this the kind of thing that you think someone like that is kind of born with, and it's just, God makes different people different ways? Or is this level of confidence and poise in this big moments, is that the kind of thing that can be cultivated through some sort of series of preparations?
Well, I think it comes from, I think guys can, experience is the mother of all studies, right? It's the old saying where the more reps you get, the more familiar you are, the better prepared you are. And I think the fact that Stetson was able to go to JUCO and get some live reps and play some real football, that definitely plays to his advantage. But I think it's what makes Stetson special. He's a guy that probably, I'm sure we're all in agreement, he wasn't getting the number one reps when Jamie was in town, and when they're trying to figure out, Dewan was the number one starter for week one. So there's a limited number of reps, but given the opportunity, Stetson's the guy that was probably able to learn from the people in front of him, and B, when it was his number that was getting called, stepped in and was prepared for that moment. He was did all of what he was supposed to do, what all guys are supposed to do when they're not the guy, of preparing himself for when he is. And that's to his credit. I think that's very much a character trait that is stronger in some than in others, and Stetson's got it in spades.
Noah Sheldon's in our Facebook comment section talking about home run hitting running backs, and Georgia hasn't hit a ton of home runs yet this year with its running game, but as you mentioned before, they clearly ran the ball better against Auburn than had been the case against Arkansas. And Bennett did say after the game on Saturday that aided his confidence, knowing that he could trust his running game there. I do think it's probably true in football all the way around, but in this Todd Monken offense in particular, these two aspects of the offense are going to really feed on each other. That Georgia needs a passing game to set up the running game this year more because of the sort of air raid style that I think that they kind of want to play. But also that if you can take away the running game from Georgia, then taking away the passing game, becomes much easier. And it's one of the reasons why, and you touched on this a moment ago, but it's one of the reasons why there is going to be a spotlight on those running backs, whether it be James Cook coming back healthy to play on Saturday. You hope that. A little bit more from Kenny McIntosh and Kendall Milton, two guys that showed you some flashes, this past Saturday. Zamir White, who I think has really done his job thus far this season, even if he hasn't had that huge statistical moment just yet. those running backs continuing to make the job easy for Bennett. That's a big part of the story, I would say.
Complementary football is huge for any offense. If you can threaten a defense in more ways than just one, there's some teams that, are predominantly pass, but they're able to pass and spread the ball out to more than just one or two wide receivers and do it in a variety of levels. They're not just throwing, the 5 yard quick slant routes or the hook routes or the wide receiver screens that have become so prevalent in today's game. They can also threaten down the field. So that's one way that pass-heavy offenses can attack a defense in multiple ways. But for Georgia, it's important to be able to run the ball and throw the ball. That's the complementary football, the basic definition of complementary offense is being able to do both. And on Saturday, they did it really well. It's the best friend to a quarterback is a good run game. The best friend to a wide receiver is a good run game. So I think Saturday was a great example of when you execute, it opens up those opportunities to do play action pass and take those shots down the field and vice versa.
By the way, speaking of that running game, Prentice Russell also on Facebook says that he thinks that Kendall Milton can be a special running back. And John, I've heard a lot of enthusiasm about Milton after last Saturday's game, where you saw him play more and you saw him play earlier in the game than you'd seen in week 1 against Arkansas. This is also a guy that I think spent a good bit of the summer in a black non-contact jersey. It seems like he may have been dealing with a hamstring issue there at that time. And yet you got a glimpse on Saturday against Auburn that, hey, maybe this freshman phenom still has a chance to be a pretty sizable part of this offense. And that's a guy I think going into this Saturday, I think Georgia fans are hoping to see a lot more of. I know Prentice Russell in our Facebook comment section certainly is.
Well, I think we've got a capable stable of backs. Saturday was impressive to me. I think each back showed a little bit more than anything that we've seen before. Obviously, with some of the younger guys, Milton and McIntosh, we haven't been able to see a lot of their reps. So when they're breaking tackles and they show a little burst, that's exciting. When James Cook puts his nose down and takes on contact and gains an extra 3 or 4 yards, that's a piece of his game that we haven't seen yet. When we see Zamir White make a read and a quick cut and a decision, in addition to the broken tackles that we've come to know him and his hard running style, that's all progress for those running backs. But most importantly, and hey, listen, I'm an offensive lineman at heart, BA, so let's bring it back to it starts with the execution up front. I think the improvement in execution from week 1 to week 2 from the big boys in the trenches is what allows us to go, man, all these running backs are looking much better because they're given that opportunity.
Yeah, with that in mind, did you like the opportunity for Warren McClendon to play more this past week? How did you feel about that? And do you think that solidifies the situation at right tackle maybe a bit?
I thought McClendon played well. He probably, and this is my opinion, I think he took advantage of that starting role a little bit better than Owen did in week 1. I think the entire group progressed and made improvements. The kind of unsung hero in this deal is Jamari Salyer at left tackle has replaced a top 5 offensive lineman that we've never, when was the last time Georgia had a top 5 offensive lineman? And for him to step in and solidify that left side the way he does, I think is a testament to his ability as an offensive lineman, because candidly, I don't think that's his natural position, but man, has he done it really well. And for the first 2 weeks, that left side has been taken care of in a way that we're accustomed to. We're used to not having to worry about anybody attack us from that side and create holes in space. And it's because we've had Andrew in that spot. And for Jamari to step in and play the way he has, I think has been a luxury for us to kind of focus on different areas and move that discussion to the fact that really the group is much improved. And let me throw out another name to you that I thought, in my opinion, he played his best game of his career, and that was Ben Cleveland. And I think it was for a number of reasons. He stood out to me because of his consistency, but there was times where, man, he was just digging folks out and moving them. Everybody in that stadium knew that Georgia was, going to continue to run the ball, And Ben Cleveland was digging folks out. It's that same potential that we've talked about with him since day one. I mean, he is a super freak of a human. He's a big guy. He doesn't have a lot of excess baggage and fat on him. But that hasn't always translated into that dominance on the football field. And I thought he had one of his best games on Saturday. So it's a group that, some of your more known commodities have stepped up and allowed guys like Warren McClendon to kind of improve along this way. And we're two weeks into his foray at this right tackle spot. Same thing with Owen, in that there's going to be a progression, but I think Warren McClendon definitely took advantage of that opportunity on Saturday.
One more thing on this topic. Trey Hill said this week that when you hear the Tennessee offensive line getting a lot of praise, he says that does put a chip on the shoulder of the Georgia offensive line. I take that to mean that they want to go out and prove that they are the best offensive line unit in a game like this. The two offensive lines don't play against each other, but they'll certainly be compared to each other. As former lineman yourself, how much of that do you think really is in a factor this week, and how much of that is in play that with Cade Mays on the Tennessee side and some praise from Wanya Morris and some of the other recruiting work that Jeremy Pruitt's done there, this Georgia offensive line, after being the offensive line with accolades so much, wants to go out and actually show that they are still a very good offensive line, and that title doesn't belong to Tennessee right now.
I think it's a great motivator. I mean, everybody kind of wants that underdog opportunity to feel like, man, I've got something to go out here and prove. Well, Georgia offensive line, you do. I mean, there's a lot of guys you're replacing. There's a lot of bodies and moving parts that you still have. You need to prove to everyone that you're worthy of the recognition that you feel like you deserve. And candidly, a 2-week pool is not a big enough pool of information to pull from to say, we've got these group of guys. Whereas Tennessee, some of their players are a little more established. And Cade Mays is one of them. I mean, you can look at his track record in the SEC. Sure, it was for another team, but he's a guy that's been in the fire in another number of positions and has fared relatively well. Wanye or Trey, they've got a bunch of guys in that offensive front in Tennessee that their track record kind of speaks for themselves. Well, Trey Hill and other Georgia offensive linemen use this as motivation. Prove to the world that you should be the offensive line when you're pointing to a group of 5 in the SEC. You should start with the guys in red and black. Well, another opportunity. I think you kind of started to put your stake in the ground against Auburn on Saturday and say, hey, don't forget about us. Well, this is another big boy game where I fully expect it to come down to who executes and who owns that line of scrimmage, especially with the weather, especially the way this game is set up to be with these heavyweight sluggerfest matchup. Well, this is a great opportunity. You want more folks to give you credit. Here's your chance.
Speaking of weather may be an issue on Saturday. It's no problem today. Just outside my window right here, it is beautiful outside, 80-plus degrees. That means great day to be outside here in this kind of early October type day. And that means when you're outside, great pairing with that is our friends at Classic City Lager. A lager, easy drinking, good, crisp flavor. If you haven't tried Classic City Lager yet, let me invite you to do so. Any store you want to go by, supermarket, whatever else, you can get those 12-pack cans all year long. You can find out more at the hashtag Good Cold Beer, because that's what Classic City Lager is. It is good cold beer from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing. All right, John, in the time we have left, I want to address something from a little earlier this week that I thought was kind of interesting. And I'll show this tweet to you on the screen here. So Mark Richt, your college coach, goes to the Knoxville Touchdown Club this week. And one of the things that gets talked about is the recruiting moment from years ago when Jabari Davis, running back from the state of Georgia, said that he wanted to go to Tennessee, didn't want to go to Georgia because he said that Georgia only went to Peach Bowls. Now, ironically, as it turns out, Jabari Davis himself played in a Peach Bowl or two there in Knoxville. But at the time, Davis's words were definitely meant to kind of really signify the gap that kind of existed between Tennessee and Georgia, a gap that you and your teammates worked to change over the course of the time that you were at Georgia. And Mark Richt said of the Knoxville Touchdown Club this week, as Jason Swain, the former Tennessee wide receiver, pointed out on Twitter, that, yeah, he was kind of bothered when he heard Jabari Davis say that. That was the kind of thing that he didn't want to have sort of portrayed about his program. John, the reason why I bring this up is I'm curious to hear your thoughts about Tennessee. When you first came to Georgia, this was a series that Georgia was just having a very hard time winning in. Yet by the time you left, that had kind of been turned around, and Georgia had reestablished some dominance in this series. And I think for those of us that lived through the 90s and the 2000s, which the Tennessee game for Georgia really mattered, to me, it's also a reminder that it still matters now. The fact that Tennessee hasn't been very good and Georgia's been on a winning streak should not cloud people's mind away from the fact that there were a lot of years in which beating Tennessee was a prize in and of itself. Tell me your kind of memories of that era and what it felt like to be a part of the transition away from a Vols level of dominance in this series to what would really become a Georgia level of dominance.
Don't you love it? I love how the cycle has now switched to where the red and black's at the top, because, you know, we talked about a guy named T. Martin before. There's plenty of listeners that are probably a little bit younger. They're like, hey, it's just an assistant coach. The guy was a stud now. I mean, you're looking at an era of Tennessee football where Phil Fulmer was the head coach, and that was a brutal place to play. The stadium was always painfully loud, where your ears would ring for another 24 hours after you leave. And it's because they were one of the better football teams in the country, and especially in the SEC. And we knew we'd have our hands full. Guys like Albert Hainsworth and John Henderson along that defensive front, you know, for an offensive lineman, we knew it was going to be a long day. That entire front would go on to the NFL. Golly, I mean, they just had a bunch of guys across the board. Dion Grant's another Georgia Atlanta guy that slips away and gets to Tennessee for a little change of pace, if you will. So that hasn't changed. The guys names that you know in recruiting and you played against in high school, you'll see whether you're playing Tennessee or Auburn or Florida, South Carolina. There's that air about it that you want to prove that your team is on top. Now, the best thing is we're in this cycle right now where Georgia has owned the SEC East. It has been theirs. And I think Kirby and Coach Smart and his staff obviously take a lot of deserve a lot of credit for that dominance. But the SEC East has looked a little bit different than when Coach Rick came in 2000. You're walking into a SEC East where Tennessee was playing for national contention at the end of the year, as is Florida. So it's a good time to be a dog. And I'm grateful that we're no longer talking about Peach Bowls, which, you know, hurt us all. This is a prideful business. Everybody takes pride in what they do. We're talking about competing for SEC championships and national championships on an annual basis.
I guess part of the reason why I bring this up is, and this is like the one sort of old man get off my lawn moment of the day, is over the course of the last couple of years, with Georgia having the success that it's enjoyed, as you said, really kind of dominating the SEC East. I think one of the unfortunate byproducts that is that the individual games sometimes are celebrated less than they would have been. I was lucky enough to be in Knoxville when you guys won the Hobnail Boot game, which, believe it or not, it's now been 19 years ago, John. I hate to tell you that, but we're both getting a little older there in that regard. But just winning the game itself was something to celebrate, not for what it meant for the future or anything like that. Just the game itself was kind of a big deal. And listen, Georgia's got a lot more goals this season than beating Tennessee. But when you hear about, you know, what Tennessee recruits used to say about Georgia, it's a reminder that, listen, you know, enjoy the moment that you're in right now. And Alabama the following Saturday will take care of itself. The SEC championship game, if Georgia's lucky enough to play in that again, that'll take care of itself. You can't do those things this particular Saturday. The only thing you can do is beat Tennessee the same way Georgia beat Auburn a week ago. And that's a rivalry win for me that's still worth celebrating too. I hope that people can take some time, if Saturday works out the way that I think it will, and certainly hope it does. I hope people can still take some time to appreciate just what that means to be able to beat a rival that at one point in time used to mock Georgia because of the belief that Tennessee had that Georgia couldn't return the favor.
Right. And that Hobnail Boot game, did it send Georgia to some special bowl game? Was it a playoff championship? No. It was this is a memorable game because it was in Coach Rick's era. This was like the first big win against one of those opponents that, you know, is an upper shelf elite football team at the time. So the reason why, obviously, Verron Haynes, it's funny, 19 years ago, Verron Haynes is the guy making a play. Now it's his son that's a big-time recruit. You're watching him make plays. It makes you feel a little bit old. But I think it also makes you appreciate that this is one of those rivalries for those that have been around and have worn the G and have put up with that disgusting looking orange. And, there's plenty of people that still wear it.
Yeah.
We've got family members that, we're trying to kick out, but they still claim us somehow. Hopefully there's others that are like us that you just think, man, can't we get rid of? But, this is one of those rivalries where it was intense for years. And I want it to stay not intense. I want Georgia to continue to dominate, because I remember those days, those Saturdays where it was a brutal slugfest. And, the teams were much more even, but I don't want even. I don't want any of these fights to be fair. I want Georgia to dominate every Saturday.
So in the little bit of time we have left, I'll finish with this. Last week, heading towards kickoff against Auburn, as someone who wants Georgia to win, I found myself getting more confident about how Georgia was going to play. Maybe a little bit of the opposite for me here right now. And I'm not saying that I think that Georgia's going to lose, but in terms of the game being maybe closer than I would like for it to be, Tennessee maybe putting up a little bit more of a fight than I would hope that it would. I guess I do find myself on guard for that just a little bit more. I think it's hard to play at a really high level multiple weeks in a row. I don't think looking ahead to Alabama is a problem for this team. I just don't think Georgia really does that. But I do think that, listen, even though Tennessee hasn't exactly beaten a collection of world beaters through 2 weeks this year, I do think, the way in which they've handled their business proves at least something. I guess I find myself kind of on guard for maybe a game that's a little closer than some Georgia fans wanted to be on Saturday. As we get ready to wrap up here, do you have any kind of sense about that one way or another?
Well, if so, it's because of a lack of execution. I think you don't have to worry about motivation. You don't have to worry about I think this team is still trying to create identity. I think they're building momentum. I think you saw progress from week 1 to week 2, and they know they're still not where they want to be. It's so early in the season that for every team, it's about us. It's about the guys in our locker room. It's about how we need to progress and get better as a team, which we saw. We saw that progression from week 1 to week 2. Now you have to carry it into week 3 against one of your divisional opponents. Again, I think that's a positive thing. I think that provides that motivation and that focus that sometimes gets lost in games 5, 6, 7, 8, kind of the middle of your season, where you feel like now we know who we are. We've got this identity. We can kind of rest on the practices that we've done this thing before. I don't see that happening. If Georgia doesn't have that performance, I think it's because of a lack of execution. Do I see that happening? No, I don't. I think Georgia comes out and they continue to build on what they started against what I think is a pretty good Auburn team, probably not what we all thought it was leading into the team, probably because the offensive line isn't right where they need to be yet, and Bo Nix is scrambling for his life. And I give a lot of credit to that Georgia defensive front. But knowing that Georgia's defense is playing at the level that they continue to play at, and seeing the progression of some of the edge rushers, which has given this time for this offense that started a little sluggish. I think that's a little bit of an understatement, but hey, get to where they were in such a short period of time. I'm excited to see how they continue to build on that, how that identity really starts to establish itself for this offensive unit. We know who the quarterback is for the most part there. I think we've got a better idea of what this front 5 group looks like. And I'm liking the progression of these tight ends, their integration, not only in the run game, but they're getting their fair share of looks in the pass game as well.
Well, John, great stuff from you. And for all of us who are looking forward to this game on Saturday, I'll remind our audience, great pairing for your home gating party or whatever you're doing to watch some football. Some Classic City Lager from our friends at Creature Comforts Brewing certainly goes great with that. Check it out. And if you're in downtown Athens, stop by and see them right there at their Snow Tire facility. It's their tap room. You can try a lot of the really cool stuff that maybe not available anywhere else. They love having a good conversation with folks who love some good craft beer. So check out Creature Comforts when you're in Athens, or check out some Classic City Lager at a retailer near you, and you can bring a taste of Athens right there to you. John, enjoy the game this weekend. We'll see you Monday on Dog Nation Daily. Back here again next week for the Dog Nation Happy Hour presented by Classic City Lager, where we'll be talking about the Alabama Crimson Tide, and hopefully we're able to have that conversation about a 3-0 version of the Georgia Bulldogs.
I look forward to it. Go Dogs.
Thanks, everybody, for being here. We'll see you next week. The Dog Nation Happy Hour, poured by Classic City Lager.